You're listening to Heritage Radio Network. Okay, Sash, we're back for episode 2. We learned so much about you, and we started to learn a bit about Gullah Geechee cuisine, but you left us on a cliffhanger. I have been holding my breath this whole time. Please, 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 get us off that cliff.
Yeah, I left y'all on a cliffhanger. Y'all like that? Yeah. I had to be cheeky. I had to be cheeky, you know? But the cornerstone of Gullah Geechee cuisine is rice.
Rice. The crowd goes wild.
I know.
Everyone's running around.
Well, as they should. As they should.
Okay, rice. Rice. This is fascinating because from our conversations and from what I've been able to gather in my very minimal amounts of food studies research, but in your very extensive food studies research, there's not a straight line necessarily drawn through to rice and African American foodways. So what's up with that?
What is up with that?
Yeah, what was your introduction to rice from an academic lens?
I think I'll start talking about grains broadly and then work my way into talking about rice. Because as someone who's been in school for food studies for a minute, let me rewind a little bit. Food history, there's a lot of focus on how staple grains and in some countries and cultures, staple starches play a really large role in nation building, world building, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of the focus within my studies was on wheat and how wheat built modern Western society, specifically Western Europe, how they're growing, the cultivation and the storage of wheat, was really essential in those cultures. And interestingly enough, as I was reflecting, the most that I've talked about rice wasn't in a food studies class. It was actually in a politics class that I took my senior year when we were learning about ancient democracies. So we're talking a lot about how ancient China and how that society was completely founded on rice and how, the role that rice played not only in ancient Chinese culture and society, but also the politics and the economy. So that was really interesting. And fun fact, I have a minor in politics, so I took a couple of politics classes here and there. And in some of my other food studies classes, we talked a lot about TCM and traditional Chinese medicine. So rice, found its way here and there. But yeah, didn't get introduced to rice as something, as something African, as something Black, as something connected to the diaspora until a little bit later in my studies.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to kind of puzzle piece my way around my relationship with rice. First, having, was that Uncle Ben's steamed rice in the bag?
Or the box.
That was my first, in the box, exactly. That was my first introduction to cooking rice on my own. Brought it with me to college. Then when I studied abroad in Costa Rica, I learned the Costa Rican way to make coconut rice. And then from there, that turned into, okay, great. I now know how to make this type of rice that connects me to this place and this way of interacting with culture. That was the very first kind of conscious effort of that. And then my partner is Chinese Canadian. He taught me how to make rice in the way his family makes it, which is pretty traditional steamed rice way. But in the in-between, my dad learned from his fraternity brother. My dad went to Dillard and he was in Omega Sci-Fi and he learned how to make rice and peas. And so I feel like I've kind of triangulated my data with the major ways of cooking rice. And throughout all of that, also learning about labor, understanding the socio-political influences, the sociocultural ways, and then the ecological relationship that humans have to rice. Rice is a crop similar to coffee, where every single grain is touched by a human before consumption, but it doesn't have the same global respect as wheat. And then you can see that mirrored in the way that products in general are sold, food products, but also in the way that certain cultures are, I would say, valorized over others. So thinking about French bread making versus rice and peas, or rice and meat, or rice and veg in any global South country. But I really do think that we could talk all day about this. Let's bring it back to maybe a pivotal moment you might have had interacting with rice that has changed maybe your perspective, if you have one of those.
Yeah, I think I do. And definitely listening to you talk about your experiences of cooking rice has made me think about my experiences of cooking rice. If you're a real like Sasha at HRN listener, you know that I do a lot of cooking in my dorm and that I've lived in a dorm for all of my college career. I was living and cooking in a dorm. So, interestingly enough, I honestly didn't learn how to cook rice properly until maybe my junior or senior year of college. I grew up eating a lot of
Yeah,
rice.
me either.
My mom made a lot of steamed rice. But when I was cooking rice on my own, I would make rice like very similar to how I would make like my oatmeal. Because oatmeal is really the only other grain that I would cook on the stove. Yes, Taylor took a
The
little
way the
sigh.
spirit just moved through me because I share that with you and was like, I don't like rice because I don't know how to cook it well.
I always loved rice, but I knew I wasn't making it right, but it tasted good. So I was like, you know what, we're vibing. Like I made my rice like I would make like a stew, like an okra stew, which makes a
Yeah,
lot of sense that that's my favorite way of,
yeah.
preparing and eating
Which is good
rice.
if you don't overcook it. There is a sweet spot, and Taylor Early did not know how to hit that for a number of years.
Oh my gosh, I have a controversial take, y'all. I have a controversial take. When I make, or at least when I make my okra stew, I like my rice a little on the softer side.
Okay, but I do like a softer rice in a stew. I
Okay.
Because once you reheat it, once all the flavor gets into the grain, that's cool with me. I
Hmm.
If you're trying to eat rice on its own and enjoy the grain itself, you better not overcook that. You better let that steam.
That's real. That's real. I've had more rice failures than successes, but I think that's the majority of people on this earth potentially. Because rice can be hard sometimes. But again, for me, given my own ancestry, I don't make a lot of steamed rice. I'm
Hmm.
typically if I am making rice, it's typically a part of some stew.
Yeah.
When I make rice, it's typically a part of like a purloo or like I love okra stew. So okra
Red beans and
stew.
rice, you also will cook in a liquid or in pot liquor. Back to Gullah Geechee and different types of rice and this through line to Africa and the
Hmm.
diaspora. But there are different grains of rice. There are different types of rice, and they have different applications culturally. And
Right.
so, if you're trying to cook jasmine rice the same as Carolina Gold, you're not going to end up honoring the grain or the flavor or the terroir, if you want to call it that, and really appreciate and get into the essence of the grain itself. And so I think with each culture, how rice ended up almost like co-evolving in the cooking methodology and in the way that people consumed it and even
Hmm.
cultivated it. Obviously, it's very specific to each region, but there's something so beautifully ubiquitous about how precious rice really is and how nourishing it is.
Hmm.
For the listeners, what you did just miss, what we did cut is for both of our safety. Two African Americans don't even be talking about jollof like that. So, to the rest of the African diaspora who might be listening, we know where we belong, which is either doing dishes, cutting the veg, or just telling you it's delicious. Sash, shall I hand this episode over to you and you can get to talking about this amazing research that you are going to enlighten listeners about?
Well, yes. We're gonna have a epic. You're gonna listen to an epic historical baddie link up of
Ooh,
all time. So prepare yourselves.
all time.
All time historical
Our
baddie link
pantry
up.
is so
So
rich,
rich, so rich, so rich,
so
so
rich, so
rich, so
flavorful,
flavorful,
nutritious. Okay,
delicious.
all right. All right. See y'all for episode 3.
Dr. Edda Fields Black's research also builds off Judith Carney's work. Her research draws connections between pre-colonial West Africa and the South Carolina and Georgia Lowcountry.
My research specialty is the transnational and transatlantic history of rice. So, peasant rice farmers in pre-colonial West Africa on the Upper Guinea coast, and Blacks who are enslaved on rice plantations in the South Carolina and Georgia Lowcountry. I learn about rice and I see it as this bridge, this connection that's connecting the Gullah Geechee in the Lowcountry with people in this part of West Africa.
I'm always trying to use food to trace back my connection to Africa. Whether it's through collard greens or okra, food is the tool I use to piece myself together. Dr. Fields Black feels the same. Discovering more of her family history was the launching pad for her work. She started traveling to South Carolina and learned more about her ancestry every time she went.
But it really wasn't until 2013 when I visited a cemetery on a rice plantation where my father's family is buried, where I encountered what I encountered, which was an open grave full of water with my ancestor's skull floating at the top. And it completely changed the way I looked at history. I'm just no longer satisfied with teaching an academic version of slavery. I can't sleep at night. I can't look at myself in the mirror. I'm driving my kids around in a hybrid SUV with organic handmade snacks that they're not eating. And I'm living this life on the back of my ancestors. They're swimming in their graves down there in South Carolina. What am I going to do about it?
I cannot imagine what an emotional and radicalizing experience that was, wading through the graves of your ancestors. From this point on, Dr. Fields Black not only dedicated herself to uncovering more of her personal history, but also examined the cultural retention amongst the Gullah Geechee people.
You had long periods in the year from early May until mid to late November when white plantation owners, white planter families, and overseers did not live on the plantations. So some historians and anthropologists have argued that it's the lack of white supervision, the lack of white interference that allowed enslaved people to sort of develop and maintain a Creole language and culture.
When we talk about enslavement, we're typically taught about the extreme levels of control that enslavers exerted over enslaved Black people. Why did white enslavers spend over half of the year away from the rice plantations? It's simply because they could not survive the malaria that ran rampant in the Lowcountry. To learn that my ancestors were able to practice some form of cultural independence from their oppressors makes a very dark history feel just a tad brighter. For me and Dr. Fields Black, rice is a light to see deeper into our shared heritage and ourselves.
Rice was this prism where historians and anthropologists were talking about cultural retention and cultural survivals among the Gullah.
Dr. Fields Black inspired me to think about my own relationship with rice. I think fondly about the 25-pound bag of jasmine rice that kept me fed all winter long, as well as the variety of rice dishes that my friends made for me throughout my college career. As a food studies student, rice was rarely the star of the show. The bulk of my readings were about wheat's role in modern Western society. When rice was discussed, the focus was typically on ancient Chinese societies. That's until I read an excerpt of Judith Carney's book, Black Rice, for one of my classes. I remember reading this piece just thinking, thank God. Finally, someone is drawing the connections I've been sensing all along.
The only people who knew how to desalinate certain kinds of rice fields to a level where rice and other grasses would grow were Africans who were originating in a certain part of West Africa. And Judith Carney has argued that it's not just picking up one group of technologies and transplanting them across the Atlantic. It's really about a knowledge system, the West African rice knowledge system, she calls it, and being able to adapt this crop to about 50 different microenvironments. If you have that knowledge system, you can pretty much grow rice anywhere.
This West African knowledge system that both Dr. Carney and Dr. Fields Black discussed within their research is what connects my ancestors back to the continent. Out of 50-plus microenvironments, from rocky hillsides to mangrove swamps, rice in West Africa and the Lowcountry are grown in the same conditions.
Now, of course, rice is grown all over the world, right? Asia, Africa, the US, South America. but only in 2 places is rice grown in brackish water. And that's in West Africa and then in the South Carolina and Georgia Low Country.
The global nature of rice will never fail to amaze me. And the fact that a singular grain can pinpoint the connection between me and the continent is astonishing. I often think about how these ancestral legacies will continue in the face of climate volatility. Coastal foodways across the globe are being faced with new challenges. I know that people definitely have ways to mitigate that, and luckily for us, Dr. Fields Black has some words of wisdom.
Judith Carney would say this is why you have these 50 plus ways of growing rice in 50 plus microenvironments, because you've got to eat. People have learned over time to diversify where they're planting rice and to diversify planting rice in more than one microenvironment, so that if you have a year or a couple of years where you get too much rain or not enough rain, you might abandon some rice fields.
If there's one thing about my ancestors, they will make a way out of no way, ensuring that our food, our culture, and our legacy will live on.
A father might tell his son, you see that over there, that overgrown thing, that's your granddaddy's rice field. I have never cleared it, but you and your sons might clear it. Don't forget it's ours.
I know I've been teasing y'all with all this rice talk. Well, next week, I'm getting in the kitchen to satisfy your craving. Rice Revelations is conceptualized and produced by me, Sasha DuBose. You also heard from the beloved Taylor Early at the top of the episode. Sound design and mixing is by Sam Girardi. The Rice Revelations logo is designed by my sister, Kennedy DuBose. This episode of Rice Revelations features clips from Fields. Hungry for more? Find the links to the full episode, as well as additional rice research resources, say that 3 times fast, in our show notes.
This episode of From the Pantry was produced by Sasha DuBose, with support from Hannah Chenard, Sam Girardi, and Addison Austin Liu. From the Pantry is an original limited series that I developed for HRN. Our executive producers are H. Conley and me, Taylor Early. Our audio engineer is Sam Girardi. This program is supported, in part, by the Julia Child Foundation for Gastronomy and the Culinary Arts, as well as public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council. From the Pantry is powered by Simplecast. From the Pantry is a production of Heritage Radio Network, the world's pioneer food radio station. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org and follow us at heritage_radio and at meaty.gram.